What do you think about this fucking Occupy Wall Street thing, man? Because this is, people are actually getting mad at me for not talking about this. And I've been trying to formulate an opinion on it. And first of all, it's very exciting. And what's exciting is that it seems like for the first time in my life that I can remember, people are standing up to the government, standing up to the federal bank in a giant way. Huge. I've never seen this before. I've never seen just droves of people in the streets sleeping there, staying there, cops losing their fucking shit, man. And it's gotten to a point where if the economy doesn't improve and these people don't have to go back to work, well, what the fuck is going to stop them from escalating? Jamie Kilstein made a tweet, and this tweet will forever, in my mind, embody what is going on here. He made this tweet. He was down at Occupy Wall Street. He was talking about how fucking crazy it is. He wrote, "They just arrested a guy because they thought he was the leader. Period. There are no leaders." Occupy Wall Street. That's the thing. They're trying to find someone to put away where they can stop the movement. The scariest thing about Occupy Wall Street for them is that there's no one person with a megaphone. This is a different feeling. This has an overthrow the government feel to it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. Ben McLeish here from the Zeitgeist Movement UK. Welcome to 2012. This is our second broadcast in the new year. And I think we're in for a very interesting ride in 2012 with all of the general cuts around the world and the exacerbated war games going on. So let's buckle in and see if we can't change some values this year. I'll start off with a bit of news from the movement and some of the events that are coming up this year for us in the next few months, particularly Z-Day, which I want to cover, the main event in Vancouver and the event in London, which is the only one I know about personally myself at the moment. We'll be getting more information about the other global events that are going on. There'll doubtless be many in Germany and France and all the usual places where we see them. And then I'm going to attach a recording of the latest talk that we did in near Canary Wharf in London on Monday the 9th of January. I'll attach the audio just for that, for anyone who wants to listen to it. It's a general, broad summary of the issues that our movement and many other movements see with the monetary system and the sort of general feed into the logic of a resource-based economy. For seasoned listeners, I'm very sorry, it's probably going to be stuff you've heard before, but believe it or not, we are still getting new members every day and every week, and it's always worth retreading some of the old ground at least and laying the foundations again so that anyone dipping into any portion of our content or listening to the radio for the first time can sort of feel that they're getting in relatively on some kind of ground floor, if you like. That's not to say that we don't, of course, cover advanced stuff too, or do one-offs in a particular direction of the sort of train of thought that we advocate. But nevertheless, there is the need always to come back and regroup, if you like. So that'll be coming up in a minute. So first off, the news. Peter Joseph was on the Joe Rogan show recently, hot on the heels, actually, of Michael Rupert also being on the Joe Rogan show in December. Between those two shows, that's 5 hours of talking, and I'd highly, highly recommend it to you. I have followed Joe for years, since I became aware of Doug Stanhope, probably in 2002. I also, of course, became aware of Alex Jones for the same reasons, and Joe Rogan as well for the same reasons. They were all sort of broadly under the Sacred Cow website, the Sacred Cow label of sort of alternative comedians and social activists that include people like Kevin Booth and ultimately Bill Hicks and all the rest of it. So those are all sort of a set of artists, if you like. And I've always enjoyed his stuff, particularly his second and third comedy albums, Shiny Happy Jihad and Talking Monkeys in Space, are extremely relevant to a lot of what we talk about. And in fact, you heard a clip of that in the opening there as well. Anyway, Peter was on there to cover everything that Joe wanted to speak about for 2.5 hours. And it was an extremely positive interview, I think, as well. There was some real camaraderie, I think, some real pleasant behaviour and some really decent conversation. It's an extensible and really extensive, if you like, primer on everything that we talk about and everything that sort of needs covering, as well as some stuff that just was by the by chat, interesting chat, stuff about Peter's past as a musician and stuff is always quite interesting. But that went out on, I believe it was January the 7th, and we know that as it was going out live, there were about 3,500 listeners, and that's not counting everybody in the archives since then, which would be, of course, way more. So that's decent exposure, isn't it? A decent exposure of these ideas that we're talking about. And similarly, Michael Rupert in December, I think it was the later part of December, you can find the feed for this on Joe's site, I'd imagine. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it, presumably, you can probably find it posted on YouTube, to be honest with you. Michael as well, it's a tough show to listen to because, a man who is studying 150 stories a day and has been doing so for, I don't know, decades, ever since he came out of the LAPD, is a man who can scare you pretty easily with some astonishing delineations, really quite scary facts. But nevertheless, it needs to be heard, I think. We can't all safely cos it up in our safe little world and ignore the realities, no matter how harsh or inconvenient they might be. Nevertheless, that went out and that was very positive, so I'd recommend that to you. It's on the TZM official channel on YouTube, and a quick Google search will find either of those for you. A unique story, and one that's been developing for a while, is that one of our coordinators for the Italian chapter, Federico Pistono, is writing a book at the moment on technological unemployment called "Robots Will Steal Your Job, But It's Okay." I would highly recommend you have a look at that. If you just Google "Robots Will Steal Your Job," you'll find his website with a video. He originally started that on one of those Kickstarter-style websites called Indiegogo, and has raised enough funds from general members of the public. I gave him something as well. And yes, I think as far as I remember, if I've been reading his updates correctly, that's coming out in sort of June, July-ish, all things being equal and all things being good. The cost of the project for him really was to get a proofreader in order to create something that really is a professional book, a professional piece that talks about the idea of replacement of labour through automation and the consequent extinguishing of that labour purchasing power, and what that means and what it could mean for humanity, both in a positive or a negative sense. So I would urge you to look out for that. It should be quite interesting. Funding's closed for that, by the way. We're not looking for any more money on that. But that should be a very, very interesting piece. I've already pre-ordered my copy. I'm very keen to read that. It sounds like a very interesting project. What else? On the 9th of January, I did a brief talk in London, in Canary Wharf, called Firing Back. That's the one I'm about to play. It was some nice feedback there. Again, it was a free event in a coffee shop that sort of puts on sort of socially aware and socially conscious events. That went very, very well. It was pretty well attended by, 50 odd people, I suppose. And we had some very interesting feedback afterwards. Every time I do a talk, or any time I attend anyone else's talks, I always find that the questions that come back after we've all left the building and are standing outside somewhere having a beer or something are always the most interesting. And there's always an interesting conversation to be had, always something to learn. So that was really, really nice. Really nice to see the enthusiasm is there, even with people who've just never heard of our stuff. There's so much that people can offer, so many interesting viewpoints, so many interesting angles on everything. So that was very, very nice to do. I hadn't done a lecture in a while. Actually, it'd been since, I think, July or August when I was in Amsterdam. That was the last time I'd done something. So very nice to have done that. And finally, 2 points. Z-Day Vancouver, the main event, so to speak, for the Z-Day Zeitgeist Day, our day of lectures and awareness, essentially, which is this year on March 10th of 2012. The tickets for that are available now from the Vogue Theatre. So if you Google, Zeitgeist Vancouver, Vogue, as in, Vogue, you'll find the page for that with details of the speakers. In fact, Federico's speaking at that as well, so I'd recommend you go. I'm not. I'm at the London event this year. So I would recommend you get those tickets and get them fast, because that kind of stuff sells out quicker than people expect. Same story for Z-Day London. We've had our tickets on sale for a month and a half now, and they are selling at a very steady pace. So don't leave it to the last moment, because we are limited, sadly, by the capacity of the building and the fire regulations. We cannot let an unlimited number of people in. So if you want tickets for either of those, both of those are available now, and they are eminently Googleable. Z-Day London is on Eventbrite. I think it's zday2012.eventbrite.com, I think, but you can find it much more easily than that. And the Vancouver one is directly from the Vogue Theatre, so I'd recommend those to you there. I know that Jim Phillips will be doing particularly a very interesting talk on the history of forced education, the coercive education, rather. And when you think about it, really, I can't think of a single time in my life when there was anything but coercive education, timetables. I'm reading a book at the moment by Michel Foucault on the prison system that draws a very serious comparison between the structure of a prison and the structure of schooling, in terms of the sort of moulding of what you, if you like, the soul, the internal human being, the associative elements of a human being, rather than just the physical body. And it should be a very interesting talk. I'm looking forward personally to see the video for that one. So yes, both of those dates, March 10th. So without any further ado, I will now play back the audio from Firing Back, the case against the monetary system and the case for a resource-based economy. And happy listening, and I will talk to you all soon. Televised distraction, and where it's cool not to care, or in an age like ours in which the fundamental logic of the structures that run our lives are more and more cleverly masked by PR, marketing and euphemism, I consider any interaction that we have with each other about questions of our social model as extremely valuable. So I thank you in advance for giving me your own time on a subject as challenging and as emotionally vested as the monetary system, especially right here where we are in the belly of the beast, so to speak, or indeed the questions of how we should be orientating our society to begin with. The focus of this talk are as follows then. Number one, I'm going to be talking about the unresolvable issues of the monetary market system. These are elements that are systemic issues not only to capitalism but to the very entity and organisation of money itself. They are inherent problems that will lead to collapse of any system in which it appears as a regulating force. The broad realisation is that as a mechanism for successful cooperation and survival, money has outgrown its usefulness. This talk is both in advocation of an actual paradigm shift away from monetary economics based on trend analysis and logical conclusions drawn from these systemic issues, not personal opinion about the moral implications of a rich or poor society or even currency-based exchange operation, but rather focused on, for want of a better word, the accounting for the effects and consequences of the monetary system in our social operation. Part two, then, will be how we diagnose what actually matters in social operation, then, if we are looking beyond what is currently valued and supported by our system. What is worth pursuing? What can be agreed upon as a basis for life value, if you like? In other words, what sets of priorities should we be considering before we can move away from what we have now? Where do we need to go from here? Lastly, I'll discuss the resolution of the systemic issues we see at hand, a move to a resource-based model of global life, and what effect does such an economic shift present to us, and what is supported by such a system, and why. And we'll have a Q&A session after that. So part one, amongst the many issues with the monetary system, I want to characterise four as chiefly important when it comes to assessing the viability of the system. The first is the value of money, or what is considered to give money value. Contrary to the belief that money is actually either backed by a tangible asset of some inherent value, like gold or silver, or that it is itself already a tangible asset. Contrary to that, money is manufactured out of debt to begin with, and as such has no actual value whatsoever. It is what is known as fiat money, an empty promissory note given value by two things: the general belief in money's value and the scarcity in the money supply. So this realization that the monetary system is essentially a mutually shared illusion, inheriting some of its power from acceptance through exposure to its system, is an important one that should play some role in freeing us to be able to step back and reconsider it as something that can be isolated as a contrivance and one worth updating or surpassing. 90% of human history was pre-monetary or non-monetary, and it was based on, the so-called real economy. This article from The Onion is, of course, satirical. US economy grinds to halt as nation realizes money is just a symbolic, mutually shared illusion. What was very interesting, though, when it was put online, is the juxtaposition you get with an advert for African poverty and an advert above it. So you end up not being able to know what's real and what isn't in that sense, thanks to the internet. And yet, despite this sort of implicit understanding that money is a human contrivance, there's nothing true about it in that sense. Money is even more fictive than its relatively new status in human history or its existing necessary belief system, which is required for its validity. It's actually even more insane than that. The manufacturing of money also demonstrates its complete divorce from reality. Money comes into existence, some of it right around the corner from us, in many ways as it's loaned from a central bank to a commercial bank or any financial institution that dots our society. It's lent to the market and would be extinguished by its ultimate repayment by the commercial bank to the central bank. In other words, money is created by producing a debt. It is manufactured on liability, not on value. Upon receipt of this money transfer from the central banks, it is then lent out to you and me directly in the form of a mortgage, where actually most money is created from, or a credit card, or indirectly in the forms of business loans or other funding that ultimately might meet our bank accounts as salaries or something similar from an employer. The problem is that as the money is being lent from a bank to an individual, it's also being created out of thin air on the spot as a bookkeeping entry every single time it's lent or every single time it's borrowed, depending on how you're looking at it. Certainly, if I borrowed 10 grand, it is being lent to me from a bank. However, not only is money invented by the borrowing of it by commercial banks, the cycle is extended into the further lending that banks do. If I deposit that 10 grand into another bank account, either by paying someone or simply paying into some account, the money then sits there and can be lent out again. This time the bank shaves off a reserve. Let's see if I've got anything. Very good. All right, we can read that while I'm talking. Traditionally, this reserve was like 10%. So of a 10 grand deposit, 9,000 is lent out and 1,000 is kept as a reserve. Except that actually 9,000 is created on top of the 10 grand. As Modern Money Mechanics, the workbook published by the Federal Reserve Bank in the branch in Chicago says, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits to the borrower's transaction accounts. Loans, assets, and deposits, liabilities, both rise by $9,000. Depositing this in another bank will, of course, raise the bank's reserves to $9,000 too. However, even while deposited, that money can also be lent out. The bank lays aside this fictive 10% and then loans out $8,100 in new money. Of course, not from the deposit, but invented on top of the deposit. $8,100 in new money that has never and will never exist as value, but as debt. This goes on and on and on. A deposit of 10 grand will engineer new money out of nowhere to the tune of £100,000. The net effect of this booming debt expansion, as more and more loans are deposited and then reinvested as loans go on and on again, is just the expansion of ever more debt. All money is literally created by the process of indebtedness. It has no value. All money in your account is someone else's liability. And every penny in your wallet is owed by someone to someone else, and ultimately all of it is owed to the banks. This enmeshed debt chain, which magnifies each level of debt into endless borrowing, is made impossible to operate without bankruptcy, social stratification, and aggregation of most wealth in few hands, because of interest. Not only are we all carrying magnified debts in the form of valueless money, but we don't even have enough money to pay back the money that was created. Practically all loans are loaned at interest, and each time new money is lent, interest is charged on that as well. And most importantly to realize about this phenomenon is that the interest that needs to be repaid is not created in the money supply. It needs to be gained from interactions with other people to their detriment, and they to yours. And compound interest is, of course, interest charged on a principal plus any prior interest. Anyone with an old credit card debt will know this, as well as the horror they must experience when they compare what is being borrowed in principal versus what was ultimately repaid with interest. Often this is double what the outlay was, and again, it's all invented. So we have an ever-shrinking pool of actual money, that was invented anyway, in comparison to the ballooning interest and principal. It can only ever lead to bankruptcy, default, stratification, poverty, crime, and so on. A final point on interest. The byproduct of tying positive accruing interest to positive accounts while charging a negative compound interest to in debt creates a reinforcer to class division that isn't based on skill, ability, need, or anything else. Instead, this division is based solely on the fact that someone has money and someone does not. A millionaire will accrue £50,000 in 1 year simply by having money in an account which features a 5% interest rate. People living on loans or credit cards or otherwise indebted will be charged ever-increasing interest on their debts. This money essentially pays the rich in that sense. This is the logic of that sort of closed cycle. It is a structural class division that is untouched by any woolly sentiments about the big society or any change that a politician enacts that isn't to do with the natural flow of money from people who don't have it to people who do. We are built into a system whose function it is to divide. Now, many might say that that's the drive to overcome our lowly origins, as Darwin might say, and rise to the top. That's a key incentive in this system. But as the inbuilt dividing systems themselves demonstrate, as well as the statistics on social mobility, which show increasingly that if you're born poor, you will die as such too, this is evidently not the case. Social mobility is against the interests of those currently doing well in the system, if you like, those currently in power. Those who are doing well. It is a direct competition to their own well-being. For after all, the rich and prosperous are only taken care of if they have money too, and have enough to maintain their stratified positions. And since wealth determines everything from social standing, education, resource access, all the way through to personal feelings of self-worth, and the mechanism of debt, interest, and vested established places can only magnify wealth into the hands of the few, who then justify this as being productive members of society rather than lucky members of a team with an unfair advantage in the game. Unfairness being the definition of the game in progress to begin with. Society has become more divided, more unequal, more criminal, as the economic model fails to satisfy even the most basic needs of life requirement. It makes it more dangerous, it makes it less functional for all of us. And that's not even to go into building concrete systems that then fail and crash and all the rest of it. We don't even count that. And of course that is all dictated by whether we can afford to build it or not. And, of course, this is in fact what we see. Life expectancy is inversely correlative to inequality in a society. The higher the inequality, the less likely there is any public health option. The worse the food is that the have-nots are likely to be able to afford, the sooner you die. The same trend is seen for obesity for almost exactly the same reason. Obesity is, in fact, also a byproduct of the basic requirement of our society to consume ever more. Quite literally, we have to get fatter and fatter if we support an all-out growth economy. Does everyone understand that? I only came to that realization this year. The obesity epidemic has nothing to do with basic health, really. It becomes an issue about basic health, but it's the combination of heavy advertising that plays off your social stratification to begin with. You are poor. Here, have this sandwich, right? That then leads to obesity. And of course, you've got to keep selling more food every time. Here's the same trend for mental illness. Mental illness is particularly dangerous not only to trust and social cohesion, but solidifies the lack of ability to progress in a society. You are literally disabled from it. As such, the tendency of already divided societies is to entrench and expand division by design. For more on these statistics, I recommend to you the Equality Trust website or The Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, who I draw these graphs from. You see the same thing in drug abuse, length of prison sentences, size of the prison population, infant mortality. All of these things can be linked to the inequality statistics. And it's important to explain what I mean by inequality, or rather what Wilkinson and Pickett talk about when they mean inequality. It's not the finite level of wealth. It's not the, everyone's a millionaire in this society and they have like 20 people who have $2,000. It's the difference, the ratio between the top 10% in a society and the bottom 10%, not any finite definitions of anything else. And it's in fact the only correlative as well. Absolute poverty doesn't correlate with this, nor does anything else. It is knowing that you're that distant and that unable to succeed or be looked after as well as the people who are doing well. That is inherent violence. Those are the basic mechanisms of money then and their systemic effects. Three more angles are important here too. One is to do with the possibilities for innovation, one is to do with resource use and waste, and the final one has to do with the false barometer effect of the market which is fed through the news to us. We'll begin with the last one first. In 2011, Lloyd's TSB announced the wholesale dismissal of at first around 30,000 positions in their corporation. And then, hot on the heels of the first announcement, a second bout of some 15,000 positions. Oh, well, that's only half the amount, that's all right. It was one of the many such moves in 2011, the year in which, of course, the decimation of the world economy began to make out its true face in the cuts that we saw on public services, health systems, travel, commuting systems, and more. What went largely unnoticed in the media at the time, or at least went entirely unspoken, was that as soon as the news of the job cuts from Lloyd's hit the market, the stock of the bank rose upon the good news. Markets took the news well, with Lloyd's share price closing up 9.7% on the London Stock Exchange, making it the biggest climber in the FTSE 100. Oh, good. That's great. I'm glad about that then. I can sleep well, knowing that 45,000 people lost their jobs for good reasons. As such, our default market indicators of share price and aggregate demand are not strict indicators of job health in the economy. Their rise doesn't register a flourishing of human welfare. They register the growth of money. They register, if we're talking about GDP, just the rate of transactions. That's all, the number of transactions. As such, every time you hear about the economy growing, you need to decode the phrase. It's not a growth in human support systems. Those aren't measured by economists at all. The more disease is diagnosed in an economy, and thus the more medicines are sold, the higher the GDP. Does that mean a healthier society? Literally not in that case. You would not consider it good news if your doctor told you that your tumour had grown 10% in less than a month. Growth does not equal advancement. And the idea of continual unimpeded growth in a finite environment equals death. As Helena Norberg-Hodge, co-director of the film The Economics of Happiness, says, an oil spill, the GDP goes up. When drinking water is so polluted we have to buy it in bottles, GDP goes up. War, cancer, epidemic illnesses, all of these involve an exchange of money, so they end up on the positive side of the balance sheet. The problem here is that the economic indicators mask growing social breakdown in a level of rising numbers. The chart goes up and the market response is to create more money out of more money. The life value is ignored. The charts go down and life systems are sold off to make the chart go up again. Our barometer of health has been decoupled and inverted. Ignorance equals strength, freedom equals slavery, war equals peace, growth equals great. Orwell was deliberate in placing these slogans in 1984. The inversion of meaning is real, and this is the primary method of control, a priori control, of the framing of cultural discussion. Oh, well, if you're against the free market, you must be against markets and freedom. That doesn't make any sense. Never mind that freedom is no longer the same meaning as it was before. It doesn't matter. We're talking about the same words. It must be the same. It is freedom to infinitely pursue money creation by money possessors. On the point of innovation, I've spent quite some time on this subject in a lecture titled The Innovation War, which can be found online. I'll summarize here the basic effect. Any established institution, very much like the established individuals that we were speaking about, must maintain their position to the exclusion of all competitors, including newer, better, more effective or cheaper practices. The electric car, or any transport which is clean, safe, fast or resource efficient, is, as technologically possible, is absolute anathema to the industries of automotive production and automotive repair. The more repairs, the better, in fact, for the economy. New, better solutions are not promoted, even by the profit motive. They are, in fact, hindered. MBA Online published a unique study 2 months ago in which it dissected the phenomenon of patent trolls in the American Silicon Valley innovation landscape. I say unique because it was animated with cartoons of people with lightsabers. Patent trolls are organizations that deliberately set out to own and profit from patents without doing any innovation themselves, not actually producing anything. Amongst the facts displayed by MBA Online, we learn the following: 270 lawsuits, which cost money, energy, and time, and more, were filed in 2011 for patent infringement. The total defense cost is in the millions. Millions which could have been spent on, you guessed it, innovation. This is a massive wastage on a grand scale. And the trend is set to get worse. Patent litigation has nearly doubled since 1991. Google acquired Motorola this year for its patents, meaning $12.5 billion was spent on the freedom to innovate without hindrance. That's really what it was. They were buying them for their thousands of patents that they held. What would $12 billion in investment in Google's clean tech venture arm, Google.org, have been? In fact, they recently cancelled their venture to try and find a cheaper renewable energy source than coal. They cancelled that. Maybe $12 billion would have been quite good at that. Instead, it's wasted on forced purchases of ideas to prevent lawsuits. Google aren't the bad guys here, nor Motorola. It's the logic of the system that forces these acquisitions, forces that kind of litigation. And this trend is seen in medical care, general technology, housing, and more. It retards our society in every way. And the worst thing is it retards it in a way that we don't see, because we just don't see the things that aren't produced. We don't see things that are great, who are then got rid of. We just don't see the potential at all. And this is implicit to the monetary system itself. Monetary reform will do little to nothing to prevent the blockading of disruptive technologies. Meanwhile, millions more die, and our possibilities for overcoming problems through scientific advances still remain with us. As long as you have to defend your position in society with monetary gains, everyone collectively loses. Finally, resources and production. Every company in a monetary system is forced by cost efficiency, another inverted word, meaning that has nothing to do with real physical efficiency at all, to produce every good or service at the lowest possible unit cost, using the cheapest make-do resources, and then sell them at the highest possible price. Anything less than this, and the competition is winning your market share. This produces three negative consequences. In particular, one, items are manufactured poorly and thus break down during use. Mobile phones, televisions, and more are in fact calibrated to break down within time frames as narrow as particular months. Who here has a mobile phone that keeps breaking down? Did you buy another phone since last year and the year before and the year before that? Even if you didn't, millions are. In 2004, we already had something like 11 million phones that were being thrown away every year, filled with minerals that take billions of years to be recreated. Of course, on the flip side, this is actually a source of further income to that company. If its marketing can trump the annoyance of their broken products to begin with. This is known as cyclical consumption, and it reinforces the need for this planned and cyclical obsolescence. We no longer buy products, we subscribe to them in a resource-consuming bid to keep the economy going. Apple Computer needs to know where it's going to get its money from next year, and if lots of people have already saturated the market, you've got as many people as possibly going to buy your product, you've got to make sure it breaks down so they can buy it again. And one single trend underscores everything we've looked at so far. In the pursuit of the greatest profit, in the bid for cost-cutting, in the bid for higher consumption and higher demand, one overriding point will make our economic way of life completely impossible. This feature is known as technological unemployment. A concise definition of this phenomenon could be seen as the unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labor. That's how the economist John Maynard Keynes described it. And you'll note his correct use of the word economize, meaning to save or make efficient some process or system. Today's economy, as we've seen, in this sense of the relationship of resources and operation, is in fact an anti-economy, another word inversion. And I have to read that, just in case you can't see it. The role of humans as the most important factor of production is bound to diminish in the same way as the role of horses in agricultural production was first diminished and then eliminated by the introduction of tractors. Very, very important. That was Vasily Leontiev, one of the gentlemen economists who is onto something, I think. Automation has steadily been reducing labour availability in the market. Once upon a time, the displaced jobs were usually caught up in an emerging sector. Agricultural automation was caught up by the industrial sector. 60% of Americans worked in agriculture in 1860. Agriculture was the economy. Today, less than 1% work on agriculture, and we're dealing with a much higher output of production. Productivity, when we look at the trends, is positively influenced by mechanization. It's inverse to employment, in fact. But what we have seen, hot on the heels of the farming revolution, was, of course, the industrial revolution as well. And at the very core innovation, the very core technology of the industrial revolution was the very process of employing machines for greater productivity and new possibilities anyway. So it didn't take very long for manufacturing to be something that employs, in fact, 8% of the American economy now. And exactly the same thing is obviously happening here. Those innovations, those agricultural revolutions and so on are, in fact, of course, they were created in the UK, weren't they, sort of? In tandem, at least. This automation will not stop. McDonald's, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Boots, Morrison's and more are slowly replacing tills with automated checkout. Online shopping now dominates high street transactions, and online shopping is 100% automated, if you think about it. Orders are submitted to systems, not to people. Machines carry the workload of several former employees, especially within manufacturing. They don't get sick, bored, tired, need healthcare, holidays, payroll tax. They're faster, more exact. I wrote faster twice, more exact, and can be employed for 24 hours a day, and don't yet demand labour unions. Not yet. They will one day. Automation is cheaper, more efficient, and offers the basis for the true possibility of a post-employment economy, an era in which humanity is at last freed from repetitive, non-inspirational labour. And automation will increase as technology feeds off itself and follows an exponential pattern, doubling human knowledge every 13 months. 13 months ago, we knew half what we know now. In another 13 months, we will know twice as much as we know now. Stop and think about how much that is. Doubling the size and spread of the internet on a yearly basis, doubling information transfer speed, information volume, and shrinking exponentially in size in these machines. Dropping exponentially in price, halving is not the correct way of describing it, but dropping and dropping and dropping. In fact, Adam was telling me before this interview, they're selling iPhones for 25 quid. That thing is 1,000 times more powerful than the MIT supercomputer of the 1970s. And that cost $11 million. Right? This is a big trend, and it affects everything. It means that ultimately automation is going to be much cheaper than human labour, even if you think you're special, even if you think your job somehow isn't technical. Even if it was, what are you, one of 10, 20, 30%? What if it's 50%? How are we going to do with 50% unemployment? That's what you'll have. Technology follows its own scientifically self-evident trend, irrespective of the system surrounding it. And in fact, in some cases, is nothing but hindered by the present change-fearing vested interests. These sorts of jobs aren't coming back, and as artificial intelligence becomes more and more advanced, our employability can no longer be used as the basis for an economy to begin with. At this point, we need to begin to focus on the emerging paradigm then. Our core resources are expiring, our economy needs to economize, a complete reversal of what it does now. Money, both in its present form of fiat-based debt and unpayable interest, not only divides and impoverishes people, but negatively impacts innovation, takes the place of what is really important, that inverted graph of value, and will fail by design. Crime and illness rise in concert with social stratification and value as well. So what do? We need to manage our global household. That was, in fact, the definition of economy to begin with, thanks to the Greeks. The management of the household is actually the true meaning. We are one planet, a sphere, a globe, with no boundaries left to consider valid. The environmental, social, and political effects of failed systems are now being felt globally. Fukushima. That's not something that is divided by a nation. You'll get the problems that Fukushima had if you're Japanese or not. And as such, we need to consider global solutions to global problems. It's time to ditch the growth economy, for starters. There's no such thing as infinite growth in a finite space. We need to move to a stable, steady-state economy where preservation, not simply accumulation, is the core value. We cannot hope to be efficient while also presiding over a system which simply values the metric of consumption over and over at ever-increasing rates. We need not only to preserve resources, but maximize the technology and systems to make efficiency skyrocket. Presently, we waste 99% of industrial resources within 6 weeks of the industrial process. Almost everything is waste, is the grand realization. 25 tons of mined materials produce 5 tons of usable materials, produce 1 ton of usable product. Why? Because it's the cheapest way to mine. If we even cut that figure in half, that 99% figure, we'd be dealing with many hundreds of percent increases in efficiency and an access abundance for everyone. How is this access abundance distributed? We need to move from a general method of consumption known as ownership to one of availability provided when needed. This logic already exists in pockets. Who here owns a shopping trolley? Communists. You don't own your own shopping trolley? You don't own an Asda shopping trolley to go to Asda? You don't own a... Well, that's weird. Hotels, shopping carts, zip cars, or ad hoc rental services are all systems which have in them the seeds of a new social design. Let's use the example of cars. Were we, for example, to build truly robust, safe, long-lasting fleets of cars with Doppler radar that prevent crashes, navigation systems that coordinate the best routes with the statistical feeds from all other vehicles on the road, where they are, where they're going, and so on, and then make these available for people as they need them? One can either pick them up, where they're placed around a city, as is the case with zip cars, or Stadtauto in Germany, or there's a few in London already. Or they could feasibly be navigated automatically to the preferred location. That sounds like science fiction, but it's already been done. In fact, where are they? There's a Zipcar. There was a Google car here somewhere. There it is. I'll just put it there. That's the kind of system we need. What would the effect of that be if introduced into a city system properly, the way it's actually needed, not the way it can be afforded? First off, you would need fewer cars. Cars spent 80% of their lives sitting on driveways or parked along roads, making roads less usable. The amount of villages I've been to where there's a 2-lane road with cars parked on each side, it's only a 1-lane road then, isn't it? That's pollution. That's car pollution. That would go away. Wasted metal and plastic just sitting there. Provided as needed, we would use less resources and need less units while meeting the needs of every person needing transport. And that's if we're ignoring integrated, holistically built, proper public transport. At the same time, car accidents, which are the failure of poorly designed technology and fallible human opinion in the navigation process, would drop dramatically. They have already compared to the past iterations of cars. The levels have dropped. However, with 500,000 people dying worldwide in car accidents every year, we can see the kind of violence we would avoid simply by updating our technology to what we can do now. Traffic jams would diminish through lower accidents and less units on the road. And that's also ignoring the fact that we're not all going to be going to work at 9 a.m. pretty soon. That's just an inevitability, no matter what system you have going. There's nothing left to turn up at 9 a.m. for. In fact, the reason we even turn up at 9 a.m. is now pretty arbitrary compared to the fact that we are working globally already with the companies we have. On the subject of jobs, traditional jobs are already disappearing. We need to make a global effort to embrace automation. It is socially irresponsible not to employ the best, most safe, clean and efficient forms of production. The jobs aren't coming back. Stop chanting it in the streets. And nor would we want them to. The human mind is still our most prized resource. It should be employed in rewarding, meaningful, real labour, so to speak, not literally run-of-the-mill tasks which exist for no reason than to prop up the system whose death knell has in fact come. How do we make the decisions? Yeah, that's a big one, decision-making. How do we do that? Because so far we seem to vote for things, and we believe that that's a decision somehow. This needs to change as well. A lot of people ask who makes the decision in this new system. We need to begin arriving at decisions rather than making them. We vote in, we don't even really vote for anything. We vote in personalities who are not qualified for any scientific understanding of social operation. A lot of people are yelling Ron Paul 2012 in the States right now. That man delivered babies for a living, all right? I'm not saying that he might not have some valid points about how the economy is run, but if you're putting someone in charge of the whole country, theoretically, that's what they're voting for. That's what they think that he will do. You might not want to pick a gentleman who is involved in live births, maybe. Just a thought. In turn, these people are lobbied with vast amounts of money to support and pass legislation which is, by definition, not going to be socially supportive. If it were, we wouldn't need to have them smuggled into the system with bribery, would we? The whole system is the corruption we face, the necessity to overcome. To this end, humanity needs to unify and share all its knowledge of global resources, scientific advances, understandings of the environment, and more, based upon a holistic, interconnected understanding of the globe and us in relation to it. Vast advances in construction, planning, resource allocation, and resource use would render hunger, thirst, energy problems, and other scarcities a thing of the past. Whole cities need to be designed holistically. Now, people balk at the idea of planned cities. They think of Milton Keynes or Brasilia. Neither of these cities was built for efficiency. They were simply designed all at once. That's the difference. Brasilia requires, it's the one on the right there, requires all traffic, whether coming from the north, south, east, or west, to pass through the centre of the city. Which idiot built that, thinking it would work out? It's not operational. It's just yours. That's the only design about it. Milton Keynes is built according to ley lines, if anyone's into paganism. Alignments with the midsummer sun and so on. In other words, the design of a prior city fabrication has always been either accidental, in the case of London, where more and more was pieced together over time, no one's fault, it's just the way it was, or the function has been a secondary consideration of the designers, above weird beliefs or vanity choices. What kind of decision-making is this that we think we prize so highly in the current system? For some concrete examples of how truly modern design would work, how buildings designed to be efficient, long-lasting, earthquake-safe, laid out for optimal public transportation would look like, I would suggest two sources for you that have already been designing new city structures for a very long time. One of them is the Venus Project, headed by Jacques Fresco. The other is the extensive work by R. Buckminster Fuller, whose critical path covers a great deal of the necessities for correct social design as well. And don't try bringing up Russia's laughably inefficient Gosplan system to me. Gosplan, with its 5-year plans, wasn't focused on long-term anything and decided to use metrics such as limiting the number of miles a car could drive to a certain number per day or per week. This isn't based according to human need at all. It's some abstraction about as relevant as the market system, decoupled from what human beings need versus what is actually possible. Renewable energy, so long now a victim of underfunding and lack of development, not to mention rampant corporate lobbying designed to sideline or block true innovations in the field, needs to be made our central energy source. Solar, wind, tidal, geothermal, and so on must be placed into our social structure in lasting, efficient, upgradable ways, not the way we do things now, cheaply, messily, slowly, against the grain. If we are serious about energy, and we do need energy, then we just do it. Regardless of the invented, overinflated cost, we will see incredibly, seriously awesome results if we do that. A drop in air and water pollution, which has caused species extinction spasms 1,000 times higher than the normal rate, would be the least of our benefits from such a system. How do we get such a civilization then, given everything in our path? Only mass awareness by the human population of the issues and their systemic and not personal nature will give rise to the drive towards a system of real freedom, real abundance, real material wealth, real safety, real toughness on the causes of crime, real toughnesses on the causes of poverty. Nothing but a complete reversal of this system represents our chance to reverse environmental, social, and political collapse. The good news is that mass awareness is already well on its way. The 2011 Occupy movement, with over 2,000 encampments around the world, was a symptom of the growing unease, or in fact dis-ease, because that's the word disease, coupled with the growing realization of our system's inherent flaws. The Zeitgeist Movement has more than 500,000 members, just us. This isn't nothing, especially when considering that they are being produced within a system that structurally inhibits social reconstructive discourse through media ownership and the trains of thought that are built into a syntax that presupposes the validity of institutions that we are surrounded by. On an individual level, it's up to each of you, each of us, to learn about everything, how this system works, or rather how it doesn't work, what is possible, the latest findings of science. I receive emails all the time from people asking me to argue with their friends because they themselves can't hold the necessary conversation about economics or whatever. That's part of the problem. You must understand and educate yourself and others. We have the need of a third industrial revolution, a new enlightenment, of thought and action, a new post-scarcity, post-money, pro-human, pro-environmental. Stop selling carbon credits and actually get off your arse. That's the goal. That's what's needed. And we must all become public intellectuals to that end, as individuals and as groups promoting 21st century understandings of where we need to go. The system's reaction will be to spew distortions and fallacies and propaganda against these notions eventually in the form of a very controlled methodology. This must be overcome by mass education, mass awareness, creating a social immune system to the invasive money to more money cancer that dominates all important parts of society. Let the naysayers say it can't be done, that this is as good as it gets, 1 billion people starving, whatever. They will be consigned to the dustbin of history with those who said that heavier-than-air objects cannot fly in an era that definitely knew about birds, for example, or that no one would have use of a computer. I think both of those are Lord Kelvin, by the way. He was actually also quite a good scientist. But it shows you we're not basing this on scientists, but on science. I consider it a stroke of luck that I had the exposure to these understandings. I humbly offer this train of thought to you in the endeavour that I can make you feel a little bit more lucky too, perhaps. As Martin Buber put it, we must humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. And I can't think of anything more rewarding to be involved in, nothing which promises such unfathomably positive results with such universal promise of abundance and harmony than the collective global humanization of our global household. We can only hope that the needle measuring the cultural zeitgeist around the world might begin to jump at registering this notion, and that as we push forward these values, that the needle will jump ever higher and higher. We are faced with a value war, and it's one that humanity must win. Thank you.